Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another video read and lecture on some of our readings for this course. We're continuing Sir Gawain and the Green Knight today. Before we begin, let's start with a terrible pun. You've heard of Elf on a Shelf? Now get ready for Zeus on a Caboose. Indeed. All right, but moving on. Let's see. Let's just get all my windows where I need them to be. And all right, so today we're picking up with part 2 of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Previously, Sir Gawain, King Arthur's nephew, took the Green Knight's game, chopped off his head, and the Green Knight lived and said he would see him in a year if he intended to keep his promise. And he does intend to keep his promise because even though he could very well die from this, he's a knight. He gave his word in front of all the other knights, can't break his word or run from a battle in chivalry. The only penalty being no longer being a knight of the Round Table anymore, no longer being a knight at all, but for them, their honor was very important. So, let's see what happens. Part 2. In some translations, it's called Fit 2, F-Y-T-T-E, but that just means part or act or such. Chapter 22. With this earnest of high deeds, thus Arthur began the young year, for brave vows he yearned to hear made. Though such words were wanting when they went to table, now of fell work to full grasp filled were their hands. Gawain was gay as he began those games in the hall, but if the end be unhappy, hold it no wonder. For though men be merry of mood when they have mightily drunk, a year slips by swiftly, never the same returning. The outset of the ending is equal but seldom. And so this Yule passed over and the year after, and severally the seasons ensued in their turn. After Christmas there came the crabbed Lent, that with fish tries the flesh, and with food more meager. But then the weather in the world makes war on the winter. Cold creeps into the earth, clouds are uplifted. Shining rain is shed in showers that all warm, fall on the fair turf. Flowers there open, of grounds and of groves green is the raiment. Birds that are busy a-building and bravely are singing, for the sweetness of the summer that will soon be on the way. And blossoms burgeon and blow in hedgerows bright and gay. Then glorious music go through the woods in proud array. So this is basically where in a movie years would go by or months would go by in a few seconds. They might just print on the screen, several months later. But a poem does it more artfully. It describes the changing of seasons, the changes in nature, the religious holidays passing by, which were basically the biggest parts of their life back then, really big parts of their life, religion and nature. Religious holidays, there were a lot more religious holidays back then, and religion was a big part of their day-to-day lives. Nature commanded a lot of things from the seasons, the temperature, the weather, their ability to grow crops or their crops dying, things like that. Notice also we talked about the color green symbolizing nature, magic, and Satan at this time. So let's look at the nature meaning. A lot of nature descriptions in the poetry here, lining up with that green symbolism. But either way, as this chapter states, Gawain tries not to think about it for several months, but he can't dodge it forever. He can't avoid it forever. And eventually, the months go by. The next chapter does much the same thing here. Chapter 23. After the season of summer with its soft breezes, when Zephyr goes sighing through seeds and herbs, right glad is the grass that grows in the open, when the damp dewdrops are dripping from the leaves. to greet a gay glance of the glistening sun, but when harvest hurries in and hardens it quickly, warns it before winter to wax to ripeness. He drives with his drought the dust, till it rises from the face of the land and flies up aloft. Wild wind in the welkin makes war on the sun, the leaves loosed from the linden alight on the ground, and all gray as the grass that is green before. All things ripen and rot that rose up at first, and so the year runs away in yesterdays many, and here winter wends again, as by the way of the world it ought, until Michaelmas, moon, has winter's boding brought, Sir Gawain then full soon of his grievous journeys thought. So more months pass, more seasons change, more religious holidays go by, until about Halloween time we slow down again. We undo the fast forward and go back into normal time. Chapter 24. And yet till All Hallows with Arthur he lingered, who furnished on that festival a feast for the night, with much royal revelry of the Round Table. The knights of renown and noble ladies, all for the love of that lord, had longing at heart, but nevertheless the more lightly of laughter they spoke. Many were joyless who jested for his gentle sake, for after their meal mournfully he reminded his uncle that his departure was near, and plainly he said, Now, liege lord of my life, for leave I beg you. You know the quest and the compact. I care not further to trouble you with tale of it, save a trifling point. I must set forth to my fate without fail in the morning, as God will guide me, the Green Man to seek. Those most accounted in the castle came then together, Owain and Eric and others not a few, Sir Donadel le Savage, the Duke of Clarence, Lancelot and Lionel and Lucan the Good, Sir Bors and Sir Bedivere that were both men of might, and many others of mark, with Mador de la Porta. All this company of the court the king now approached, to comfort the knight with care in their hearts. Much mournful lament was made in the hall, that one so worthy as Gawain should wend on that errand, to endure a deadly dint, and deal no more with blade. The knight ever made good cheer, saying, Why should I be dismayed? Of doom the fair or drear, by a man must be assayed. So, Gawain, even though he's made a promise, he asks his king's permission and blessing to go seek the Green Knight, which is part of his chivalry, loyalty to his king or lord, part of the feudal system. And a lot of people are sad to see him go. The knights, the ladies, the author name drops a lot of famous knights from other King Arthur stories here, some of which you might recognize. And they're all sad to see him go because they know he's probably not going to survive to this Green Knight. I mean, how could he? And this last stanza here, the bob and wheel of the chapter, says basically, every man must meet his fate someday. If I've got to die, I've got to die. It happens to all of us. It's one of those whatever happens, happens statements that a lot of warriors tend to make in these stories. Beowulf said similar things in his story before diving into a fight, sometimes literally diving. But chapter 25. He remained there that day, and in the morning got ready, asked early for his arms, and they all were brought him. First a carpet of red silk was arrayed on the floor, and the gilded gear in plenty there glittered upon it. The stern man stepped thereon, and the steel things handled, dressed in a doublet of damask of Tarsia, and over it a cunning catapus that was closed at the throat, and with fair ermine was furred all within. Then sabatons first he set on his feet, his legs lapped in steel, and his lordly greaves, on which the polanes they placed polished and shining, and knit upon his knees with knots all of gold. Then the comely cuisses and the cunningly clasped the thick thews of his thighs that were thongs on him tied. And next the byrnie woven of bright steel rings, upon costly quilting, enclosed him about, and armlets well burnished upon both of his arms, with gay elbow pieces, and gloves of plate, and all the goodly gear to guard him whatever betide. coat armor richly made, gold spurs on heel and pride, girt with a trusty blade, silk belt about his side. So, in vivid detail, the poet author here is basically showing us Gawain putting his armor on. Spends a great deal of time describing the armor and putting it on. One thing to take away here, you don't need to know any of the technical terms for his armor pieces, but basically note the difference from Beowulf's time. In Beowulf's time, they basically had chainmail and maybe a breastplate, just a solid piece to cover the chest, and a helmet. But in Gawain's time, later Middle Ages, we have full plate armor. Could weigh over 100 pounds or so, plus weapons, all interlocking metal plates over chainmail, over leather, very heavy. And they had to get on and off horses and fight in battles and run around and such in this armor, even though it was super heavy. If you remember from these slides that introduced this unit, you could die from any number of ways from armor like this, including heat stroke, drowning if you fell in water, because you can't swim in this. It's not like video games where it's just gonna take your fatigue away or something. It's you sink like an anchor. Or you could fall on your back and be like a turtle on its back. You need help to get up. In fact, additionally, people often scheduled battles ahead of time back in these days, and it wasn't just a matter of courtesy. It became a matter of courtesy because everyone wore armor like this, and it took time and help from your squire to get it on and take it off again. So, yeah, quite a hassle, plate armor. We'll talk about what replaced it in next unit, but moving on, let's hear more about Gawain's flashy, stylish armor here. Chapter 26. When he was hasped in his armor, his harness was splendid. The least latchet or loop was all lit with gold. Thus harnessed as he was, he heard now his mass, that was offered and honored at the high altar. And then he came to the king and his court companions, and with love he took leave of lords and ladies. And they kissed him and escorted him, and to Christ him commended. And now Gringolet stood groomed and girt with a saddle. That's his horse, Gringolet. Gleaming right gaily with many gold fringes, and all newly for once nonce nailed at all points. Adorned with bars was the bridle with bright gold banded, the appareling proud of poitrel and of skirts, and the crupper and caparison accorded with the saddle bows. All was arrayed in red with rich gold studded, so that it glittered and glinted as a gleam in the sun. Then he in hand took the helm and in haste kissed it. Strongly was it stapled and stuffed within. It sat high upon his head and was hasped at the back. And the light kerchief was laid over the beaver, all braided and bound with the brightest gems. Upon broad silk broidery, with birds on the seams, like popinjays depainted, here preening and there turtles and true loves, entwined as thickly as if many seamstresses had the sewing full 7 winters in hand. A circlet of greater price, his crown about did band, the diamond's point device, their blazing bright did stand. So Gawain is apparently wearing incredibly new, flashy, stylish, and certain points bejeweled armor. I guess he is about to go die, potentially, so he to wear his best. But we're about to hear about something very important about his equipment here, something more meaningful and symbolic. Pay close attention for what the book calls the endless knot or the pentangle. That's going to be a symbol Gawain refers to many times in the book to remind him of the 5 times 5 points of chivalry that he must remember, and other things. Let's take a look here. Chapter 27. Then they brought him his blazon that was of brilliant jewels, with the pentangle depicted in pure hue of gold. By the baldric he caught it, and about his neck cast it. Right well and worthily it went with the knight. and why the pentangle is proper to that prince so noble, I intend now to tell you, though it may tarry my story. It is a sign that Solomon once set on a time to betoken troth, as it is entitled to do. For it is a figure that in the 5 points holdeth, and each line overlaps and is linked with another, and every way it is endless, and the English I hear everywhere name it the endless knot. So it suits well this knight and his unsullied arms. Forever faithful in 5 points, and 5 times under each, Gawain as good was acknowledged, and as gold refined, devoid of every vice, and with virtues adorned. So there the pentangle painted new he on shield and coat did wear, as one of words most true, and knight of bearing fair. So the pentangle is on his shield, though on the other side, on the inside of the shield, is painted a portrait of the Virgin Mary, probably to remind him of his religious obligations and chastity and things like that. But also, think about the concept of courtly love for a moment with the portrait of Mary on his shield. In its purest form, courtly love is supposed to be a pure admiration for a noble lady above one's station, the admiration of which drives one to do good things and be a better person. Kind of in its purest form here with his admiration of Mary. So, interesting thing there. But getting back to the pentangle, chapter 28. First faultless was he found in his 5 senses. That's our first 5. The 5 senses. And next, in the 5 fingers, he failed at no time. Now, that doesn't mean he was really good at thumb wrestling or something. 5 fingers means his strength, the strength of his hands, one of the virtues that Beowulf was best known for. And firmly on the 5 wounds all his faith was set, that Christ received on the cross, as the creed tells us. And wherever the brave man in battle was come, and on this beyond all things was his earnest thought, that ever from the 5 joys all his valor he gained, that to heaven's courteous queen once came from her child, for which cause the knight had in comely wise on the inner side of his shield her image depainted, that when he cast his eyes thither his courage never failed. So notice sets of 5 are devoted to religious concepts, the 5 wounds of Christ and the 5 joys of Mary. Because Gawain's code is a lot more complicated than Beowulf's. It's not just battlefield virtues and strength and courage and stuff. It's also all of the aspects of chivalry, Christianity, all those rules wrapped into one code. So it's a much bigger code to keep to. No wonder he needs a very complex symbol to remember it all. But we get to the 5th that was used, as I find by this knight, was free giving, or generosity, and friendliness, or courtesy, first before all, and chastity and chivalry, changeless and straight, and piety surpassing all points. These perfect 5 were hasped upon him harder than on any man else. Now these 5 series in sooth were fastened on this knight, and each was knit with another and had no ending, but were fixed at 5 points that failed not at all, coincided in no line, nor sundered either, not ending in any angle anywhere, as I discover. Wherever the process was put in play or passed to an end, therefore on his shining shield was shaped now this knot, royally with red jewels upon red gold set. This is the pure pentangle, as people of learning have taught. Now Gawain in brave array his lance at last hath caught. He gave them all good day for evermore, as he thought. So we have the 5 sets of 5 for the pentangle. That's 5 senses, 5 fingers, 5 wounds of Christ, 5 joys of Mary, and the 5 virtues: generosity, courtesy, chastity, chivalry, and piety. The reason the author goes into all of this is because Gawain is bound to be tested on some of these points. And since this is hundreds of years after Beowulf, the conflict is going to be a little more complex. He's going to be tested in both his battle virtues, but also in his more religious and chivalric virtues as well. Chapter 29. He spurned his steed with the spurs and sprang on his way, so fiercely that the flint sparks flashed out behind him. All who beheld him so honorable in their hearts were sighing, and assenting in sooth, one said to another, grieving for that man, before God 'tis a shame, that thou, Lord, must be lost, who art in life so noble. To meet his match among men, marry 'tis not easy. To behave with more heed would have behooved one of sense, and that dear lord duly a duke have to have made, illustrious leader of liegemen in this land as befits him, and that would better have been than to be butchered to death, beheaded by an elvish man for an arrogant vaunt. Who can recall any king that such a course ever took, as knights quibbling at court at their Christmas games? Many warm tears outwelling there watered their eyes, when that lord so beloved left the castle that day. No longer he abode, but swiftly went his way. Bewildering ways he rode, as the book I heard doth say. So in this chapter, many more people weep to see Gawain go, lament that his life should be thrown away for a silly game, etc. And the author breaks the fourth wall again and says this is all as he heard in the book once upon a time, trying to suggest again that he didn't invent this story, that he read it in a book somewhere. Earlier, he said he heard it in town, but now he's saying he read it in a book. Again, this is the only book where we find this story in this form, so not sure what book he was reading exactly. Either way, Chapter 30, Gawain begins his wide journey. Now he rides, thus arrayed, through the realm of Logres, which is an old retro word for England, very, very archaic word for England. Basically, this journey is going to take him from southern Wales, north through Wales along the coast, and then east, inland, into England. But Sir Gawain in God's care, though no game know he found it, oft forlorn and alone he lodged of a night, where he found not afforded him such fare as pleased him. He had no friend but his horse, in the forests and hills, no man on his march to commune with but God. This loneliness description here kind of reminiscent of the Seafarer poem from earlier this year, the cold and lonely journey alone. Till anon he drew near unto northern Wales. All the isles of Anglesey he held on his left, and over the fords he fared by the flats near the sea, and then over by the Holyhead to high land again, in the wilderness of Wirral. There wandered but few, who with good will regarded either god or mortal, which means some bad folks wandered around that area. You see, back in the day, you had people called highwaymen. Highwaymen were people who waited by the highway to rob you, to rob travelers as they went by, possibly worse. So he's got to contend with a lot of wild folks over there, criminals and such. And ever he asked, as he went on of all whom he met, if they had heard any news of a knight that was green, in any ground thereabouts, or of a green chapel. All denied it, saying nay, that never in their lives a single man had they seen that of such a color could be. The knight took pathways strange by many a lonesome lea, and oft his view did change that chapel ere he could see. So remember, the Green Knight did not give an address. He said, I am the Knight of the Green Chapel. I come from the Green Chapel. And he said, if you ask around, you will find me. People will tell you where I am. He's asking around, and nobody has heard of this Green Knight at all. Nobody's heard of a Green Chapel. They're all looking at Gawain like he's got two heads or something. Like, what are you talking about, man? Green Knight, Green Chapel. You must be crazy. So that's a bit of a problem for keeping his word. Chapter 31. Many a cliff he climbed over in countries unknown, far fled from his friends, without fellowship he rode. At every wading or water on the way that he passed, he found a foe before him, save at few for a wonder. And so foul were they that fell, that fight he must needs, So many a marvel in the mountains he met in those lands, 'twould be tedious the 10th part to tell you thereof. At whiles with worms he wars. And that doesn't mean he's wrestling earthworms on the ground. That's a slang for dragons, worms. And wolves also, and whilst with wood trolls that wandered in the crags, and with bulls and with bears and boars too at times, and with ogres that hounded him from the heights of the fells. Had he not been stalwart and staunch and steadfast in God, he doubtless would have died, and death had met often. For though war wearied him much, the winter was worse. When the cold, clear water from the clouds, spilling, froze ere it had fallen upon the fated earth. Well nigh slain by the sleet, he slept ironclad, more nights than ere now in the naked rocks, where clattering from the crest of the cold brook tumbled, and hung high over his head in hard icicles. Thus in peril and pain and in passes grievous, till Christmas Eve that country he crossed all alone in need. The knight did at that tide his plaint to Mary plead. Her rider rode to guide and to some lodging lead. So Gawain faces many perils on the road. He has to fight quite a number of things. And he also has to fight the bitter cold because he's sleeping outside in his armor in the winter in England. So not in a cozy, warm home of some kind or house or hotel. But notice how much time the author gives for battles. Not very much. So all of the battling here has just been summed up very briefly, very concisely, as if it's there just to show, okay, Gawain can fight. He's good at fighting. I mean, look at all the things he fought just on the road, as a footnote, basically. But it shows us it's not going to be the main focus of this story. It's there, but it's not the focus. And now Gawain is feeling kind of helpless. He's praying, he's asking God and Mary and such to show him some sort of lodging, something. He's really tired of being lost and sleeping outside in the winter. Very unpleasant. Chapter 32. By a mount in the morning merrily he was riding into a forest that was deep and fearsomely wild, with high hills at each hand, and hoar woods beneath, of huge aged oaks by the hundred together. The hazel and the hawthorn were huddled and tangled, with rough, ragged moss around them trailing, with many birds bleakly on the bare twigs sitting, that piteously piped there for pain of the cold. The good man on Gringolet goes now beneath them, though through many marshes and mires, all a man all alone, troubled lest a truant at that time he should prove, from the service of the sweet Lord, who on that selfsame night of a maid became man, our mourning to conquer. So Gawain's stressing not just about not finding the Green Chapel, but about finding nowhere to celebrate Christmas Mass, because he's out alone in the middle of the wilderness here. He doesn't want to be a truant, remiss in his duties, either to this promise or to his religious obligations. And therefore, sighing, he said, I beseech thee, O Lord, and Mary, who is the mildest mother most dear, for some harbor where with honor I might hear the Mass and the Matins tomorrow. This meekly I ask, and thereto promptly I pray, with Pater, Ave, and Creed. That is the Lord's Prayer, Our Father, the Hail Mary, and Apostles' Creed. In prayer he now did ride, lamenting his misdeed. He blessed him oft and cried, The cross of Christ me speed. So he rides through a wild, bizarre, dark, deep forest and prays for something, a sign of some kind. Chapter 33. The sign on himself he had said but thrice, ere a mansion he marked within a moat in the forest, on a low mound above a lawn laced under the branches of many a burly bole round about by the ditches, the castle most comely that ever a king possessed, placed amid a pleasance with a park all about it, within a palisade of pointed pales, set closely, that took its turn round the trees for 2 miles or more. Gawain from the one side gazed on the stronghold as it shimmered and shone through the shining oaks, and then humbly he doffed his helm, and with honor he thanked Jesus and St. Julian, who generous are both, who had courtesy accorded him to his cry hearkened. Now, bon hostel, quoth the knight, I beg of you still. Then he goaded Gringolet, and with his gilded heels, and he chose by good chance the chief pathway, and brought his master bravely to the bridge's end at last. That brave bridge was appalled, the gates were bolted fast, the castle was strongly walled, it feared no wind or blast. So Gawain's been lost for some time now, a couple of months, and he's lost all hope. He's praying and hoping and struggling, and then after all of that, in the middle of nowhere, boom, a shining white castle. So bright and shiny and white, it looks brand new. Out of nowhere. Kind of convenient, too convenient, bit of a red flag here. Should be raising some suspicions at this point as to how convenient this is. But Gawain doesn't seem the suspicious type, so he just goes forward. Chapter 34. Then he stayed his steed on a step bank halted. Above the steep double that was drawn round the place, the wall waded in the water wondrous deeply, and up again to a huge height in the air it mounted, of all hard-hewn stone to the high cornice, fortified under the battlement in the best fashion, and topped with fair turrets set by turns about, that had many graceful loopholes with a good outlook. That night a better barbican had never seen built, and inward he beheld the hall uprising. Tall towers set in turns as the tines clustering, the fair finials joined featly, so fine and so long, their capstones all carven with cunning and skill. Many chalk-white chimneys he chanced to espy. Upon the roofs of towers all radiant white, so many a painted pinnacle was peppered about. Among the crenels of the castle clustered so thickly, that all pared out of paper it appeared to have been. The gallant knight on his great horse good enough thought it, if he could come by any course that enclosure to enter, to harbour in that hostel while the holy day lasted with delight. He called, and there came with speed a porter blithe and bright. On the wall he learned his need, and hailed the errant knight. So Gawain approaches the castle. It's even more beautiful up close, and he yells for the gate guard to come come let him in. The gate guard sort of stands on top of the wall and yells down at you while the gate is closed. They talk, and if he wants to let him in, he'll signal, and the drawbridge door will be lowered. Let's see if that happens. Chapter 35. Good sir, quoth Gawain, will you go with my message to the high lord of this house, for harbour to pray? Yes, by Peter, quoth the porter, and I promise indeed that you will, sir, be welcome while you wish to stay here. Then quickly the man went and came in again soon, servants bringing civilly to receive there the knight. They drew down the great drawbridge and duly came forth, and on the cold earth on their knees in courtesy knelt, to welcome this wayfarer with such worship as they knew. They delivered him the broad gates and laid them wide open, and he readily bade them rise and rode over the bridge. Several servants then seized the saddle as he alighted, and many stout men his steed to a stable then led, while knights and esquires anon descended, to guide there in gladness this guest to the hall. Then he raised up his helm, many ran there in haste, to have it from his hand, his highness to serve. His blade and his blazon both they took charge of. Then he greeted graciously those good men of all, and many were proud to approach him, that prince to honour. All hasped in his harness to hall they brought him, where a fair blaze in the fireplace fiercely was burning. Then the lord of that land, leaving his chamber, came mannerly to meet the man on the floor. He said, you are welcome at your wish to dwell here. What is here, all is your own, to have in your rule and sway. Gramercy, quoted Gawain, may Christ you this repay. As men that to meet were fain, they both embraced that day. So here Gawain is not only led into the castle, but everyone treats him with so many kindnesses and courtesies and hospitality. They welcome him like an honored guest. They take his armor to go be cleaned and polished, and give him robes to wear, comfy robes, like he's in some sort of fancy hotel. And he's welcomed into a cozy room with a fireplace where the lord of this castle, who, for convenience sake, I'll just go ahead and tell you his name, is Lord Bertilac. Lord Bertilac, the lord of this hall, welcomes him and says, "Hey, my house is your house. Welcome. Enjoy your stay at Castle Bertilac here." Gawain says gramercy, or great thanks. Thank you very much. But let's hear more about Lord Bertilac for a moment. Chapter 36. Gawain gazed at the good man who had greeted him kindly, and he thought bold and big was the baron of the castle, very large and long, and his life at his prime. Broad and bright was his beard, and all beaver-hued. Stern, strong in his stance upon stalwart legs, his face fell as fire, and frank in his speech, and well it suited him in sooth as it seemed to the knight, a lordship to lead untroubled over lieges trusty. To a chamber the lord drew him, and charged men at once to assign him an esquire, to serve and obey him. And there to wait on his word worthy men were, who brought him to the bright bower where the bedding was splendid. There were curtains of costly silk, with clear golden hems, and covered cunning wrought, with quilts most lovely, of bright ermine above, embroidered at the sides, hanging running on ropes with red gold rings, carpets of costly damask, that covered the walls, and the floor underfoot fairly to match them. There they despoiled him, speaking to him gaily, his byrnie doing off at his bright armor. Rich robes then readily the man ran to bring him, for him to change and clothe him, having chosen the best. As soon as he had donned one and dressed was therein, as it sat on him seemly, with its sailing skirts, then verily in his visage a vision of spring. To each man there appeared in marvellous hues, bright and beautiful, was all his body beneath. That knight more noble was never made by Christ, they thought. He came none knew from where, but it seemed to them he ought to be a prince beyond compare, in the field where fell men fought. So they escort him to a luxurious guest bedroom, with a luxurious bed, such a fancy bed that it has bed curtains, as you might see on one of those movies of Christmas Carol with Ebenezer Scrooge. He has a bed with bed curtains. That was a thing back in the day, especially in older homes, castles, manor homes, where you actually had drafts in the house. Curtains on your bed were actually kind of handy. But these curtains have gold rings on them, and everything's very fancy. And notice the robes they dress him in are not just any robes. He is a vision of spring in these robes. And the color that comes to mind most with spring is new growth, new plants, green. So they've dressed him in green robes for some reason. I'm sure that's a huge coincidence there. Doesn't mean anything at all. Moving on. Chapter 37. A chair before the chimney, where charcoal was burning, was made ready in his room, because he has a fireplace in his bedroom as well, many fireplaces in this castle, all arrayed and covered with cushions upon quilted cloths that were cunningly made. Then a comely cloak was cast about him, of bright silk brocade. Brocade? 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 I never could find out. Embroidered most richly, and furred fairly within the fells of the choicest, and all edged with ermine, and its hood was to match. And he sat in that seat seemly and noble, and warmed himself with a will, and then his woes were amended. Soon up on good trestles a table was raised, and clad with a clean cloth clear white to look on, there was surnape salt cellar and silver spoons. He then washed as he would, and went to his food, and many worthy men with worship waited upon him. Soups they served of many sort, seasoned most choicely in double helpings as was due. And divers sorts of fish, some baked in bread, some broiled on the coals, some seethed, some in gravy savored with spices, and all the condiments so cunning that it caused him delight. A fair feast he called it frankly and often. Graciously, when all the good men together were pressed him, now pray this penance deign to take, 'twill improve another day. The man much mirth did make, for wine to his head made way. So Gawain has gone from freezing and hungry in the wilderness and lost to a cozy, warm room with a bed, fireplace, and now he's being given a feast. A feast of like fish 7 million different ways. And you might wonder why fish. And it says, note, this penance Dane will take as some sort of joke that we're probably not getting. Back in the day, well, you might know that for some religions in Lent, people don't have meat on Fridays. They might have fish or vegetarian dishes or something. For some places, and at certain ages, a long time ago, it was no meat on all Fridays, and so having fish in this time would be like a penance, as in not having other meats or things like that. He just avoiding meat that day. But it's not really penance if he's having fish a million different ways in the most luxurious ways possible. A feast of seafood here. So he's like, yeah, this is penance, all right. Oh, this is so tough to have this seafood feast. Oh, and for some reason, the host is getting him drunk too. So I'm sure that'll help his decision making later on. Chapter 38. Then inquiry and question were carefully put, touching personal points to that prince himself, till courteously he declared that to the court he belonged, that high King Arthur in honor held in his sway, who was the right royal king of the Round Table, and 'twas Gawain himself that their guest now sat, and had come for that Christmas, as the case had turned out. When the Lord had learned whom luck had brought him, he laughed, loud laughed he thereat, so delighted he was, and that made very merry all the men in the castle, and to appear in the presence were pressing and eager of one who all profit and prowess and perfect manners comprised in his person, and praise ever gained. Of all men on Middle Earth he most was admired. Softly each said then and there in secret to his friend, now fairly we shall mark the fine points of manners, and the perfect expressions of polished converse. How speech is well spent will be expounded unasked. Since we have found here this fine father of breeding, God has given us of his goodness his grace now indeed, who such a guest as Gawain has granted us to have. When blissful men at board for his birth sing blithe at heart, what manners high may mean, the knight will now impart. Who hears him well, I ween, of love speech learn some art. So Gawain says who he is, where he comes from, and everyone's so thrilled to have a Knight of the Round Table as their guest. It's kind of a celebrity in England at that time. Very happy to see someone from the court of King Arthur, who are known to be the most chivalrous knights in all the land. And they expect to see the height of courtesy from this knight, since courtesy is one of the points of chivalry he must uphold. They figure he's going to be so darn courteous, it's going to be really impressive or something. Never thought of courtesy as being an exciting thing, but there you go. Chapter 39. When his dinner was done, and he duly had risen, it now to the night time very near had drawn. The chaplains then took to the chapel their way, and rang the bells richly as rightly they should, for the solemn evensong of the high season. The Lord leads the way, and his lady with him. Now, as we continue this chapter, I want you to keep in mind a literary concept we talked about earlier called a foil. Now, a foil is when we have two characters side by side who have extremely opposing traits, either physical traits, personality traits. But you take those two characters and put them side by side, and their differences, their opposites, stand out all the more by having them side by side. So that's going to be very important here. We're going to be introduced to two characters, and they are very, very different from one another, but they are often seen hanging out together. Let's continue. Gawain follows gladly and goes there at once, and the Lord seizes him by the sleeve, and to a seat leads him, kindly acknowledges him, and calls him by his name, saying that most welcome he was of all the guests in the world. And he grateful thanks gave him, and each greeted the other, and they sat together soberly while the service lasted. Then the lady longed to look at this knight, and from her closet she came with many comely maidens. Now, back then, the word closet meant a little something different. She wasn't just hanging out in a closet with all her clothes hanging up or something. That was all of her private chambers, like her particular wing of the castle, her rooms, was referred to as her closet. Yeah. So this is the lady, the wife of the house, Lady Bertilac, we will be calling her. Lady Bertilac. And she was fairer in face, in her flesh, in her skin, her proportions, her complexion, and her port than all others, and more lovely than Guinevere to Gawain she looked. He came through the chancel to pay court to her grace. Leading her by the left hand, another lady was there, who was older than she, indeed ancient she seemed, and held in high honor by all men about her. But unlike in their looks those ladies appeared, for if the younger was youthful, yellow was the elder. With rose hue the one face was richly mantled, rough wrinkled cheeks rolled on the other. On the kerchiefs of the one many clear pearls were. Her breast and bright throat were bare displayed, fairer than white snow than falls on the hills. The other was clad in a cloth that enclosed all her neck. Enveloped was her black chin with chalk-white veils, her forehead folded in her skin, and so fumbled all up, so topped up and trinketed with trifles bedecked, that naught was bare of that beldam, but her brows all black, her two eyes, and her nose, and her naked lips. And those were hideous to behold, and horribly bleared, that a worthy dame she was may well, for God be said. Short body and thick waist, with bulging buttocks spread, more delicious to the taste was the one she by her led. As awkward as that chapter was to read, let's look at the foil concept here. Two characters, Lady Bertilac and an old lady who does not get a name. She's just old lady for the moment here. Lady Bertilac and the old lady. Always side by side, but very different. Lady Bertilac is young and attractive. The old lady is old and ugly, to be blunt. She's a fictional character, so I don't mind being blunt here. And it goes on to describe that in great detail, how attractive the former is and how very unattractive the latter is, using such words as beldam, which is basically another way of saying old hag. Or like a. Have you ever seen Coraline, the Neil Gaiman movie? That evil lady with the needles and such was called the Beldam. There's a reason for that, kind of spooky looking. Anyway, other descriptors they use here. They talk about the older lady having a black chin and brow. That means she has kind of some stubble and a unibrow going, the old lady does. And I want to draw your attention to some alliteration here. Rough, wrinkled cheeks rolled on the other. So she's got some rolls down here on the chin. Yeah. So the author, for some reason, insists on telling us in great detail the physical attributes and differences of these two characters. but he hides an important detail in the middle of it. Thinks it's going to get past us, but not only is he not naming the old lady, he says that she is held in high honor by all men about her. So whoever she is, she's important. She is respected and revered by everyone here, but they will not name her. Maybe that's nothing, but I'm going to go ahead and say it's something. It's something. Anyway, chapter 40. When Gawain glimpsed that gay lady that so gracious looked, with leave sought of the Lord toward the ladies he went. The elder he saluted, low to her bowing, and about the lovelier he laid then lightly his arms, and kissed her in courtly wise, with courtesy speaking. His acquaintance they requested, and quickly he begged to be their servant in sooth, if so they desired. They took him between them, and talking they led him to a fireside in a fair room, and first of all called for spices, which men sped without sparing to bring them, and ever wine therewith well to their liking. The Lord for their delight leaped up full often, many times merry games being minded to make. His hood he doffed, and on high he hung it on a spear, and offered it as an honor to any who to win who the most fun could devise at that Christmas feast. So I'm guessing Lord Bertilac is a little drunk at this point, or at least pretending to be drunk, because he puts his hat on a spear and says, "Man, whoever's the funnest tonight wins my hat." Yeah, he's drunk. "And I shall try by my troth to contend with the best, ere I forfeit this hood, with the help of my friends." Thus with laughter and jollity the Lord made his jests, to gladden Sir Gawain with games that night in hall. Until the time was due that the Lord for light should call, Sir Gawain with leave withdrew, and went to his bed withal. Chapter 41. On the morn when every man remembers the time that our dear Lord for our doom to die was born. So, Christmas. In every home wakes happiness on earth for his sake. So did it there on that day with the dearest delights. At each meal and at dinner marvelous dishes men set on the dais. The daintiest meats, the old ancient woman was highest at table. Notice the author's slipping something in there again. He's about to describe lavish feasts again, all kinds of food. But he's like, oh yeah, and by the way, the old ancient lady is at the head of the table. She's got the highest seat of honor there for some reason. But never mind that. Meetly to her side the master he took him. Gawain and the gay lady together were seated, in the centre, whereas was seemly the service began. And so on through the hall as honour directed. When each good man in his degree without grudge had been served, there was food, there was festival, there was fullness of joy. And to tell all the tale of it, I should tedious find, though pains I might take every point to detail. Yet I ween that Gawain and that woman so fair in companionship took such pleasure together in sweet society, soft words speaking, their courteous converse clean and clear of all evil, that with their pleasant pastime no prince's sport compares. Drums beat and trumpets men wind, many pipers play their airs, each man his needs did mind, and they too minded theirs. So apparently Sir Gawain and Lady Bertilac have a great conversation together, or something. Chapter 42. With much feasting they fared the first and the next day, and as heartily the third came hastening after. The gaiety of St. John's Day was glorious to hear. With cheer of the choicest childermass followed, and that finished their revels as folk there intended, for there were guests who must go in the grey morning. So a wondrous wake they held, and the wine they drank, and danced on, and dearly they carolled. At last, when it was late, their leave then they sought, to wend on their ways, each worthy stranger. Good day, then said Gawain, but the good man, Lord Bertilac, stayed him, and led him to his own chamber, to a chimney corner, and there he delayed him, and lovingly thanked him for the pride and pleasure his presence had brought, for so honouring his house at that high season, and deigning his dwelling to adorn with his favour. Believe me, sir, while I live, my luck I shall bless, that Gawain was my guest at God's own feast. Gramercy, sir, said Gawain, but this goodness is yours. All the honor is your own. May the high king repay you. And I am under your orders, what you ask to perform. I am bound now to be, for better or worse, by right. Him longer to retain, the lord then pressed the knight. To him replied Gawain that he by no means might. So Gawain and Lord Bertilac are thanking each other profusely. Lord Bertilac's like, wow, I had a knight of King Arthur as my guest at Christmas. Man, I'm so happy. And Gawain's like, no, no, thank you. I should be thanking you for being such a generous host and giving me a place to stay when I was lost in the cold and starving. And then he says, if there's anything I can ever do to repay you, Lord Bertilac, just let me know. I'll do it. It's always good to sign a blank check to someone, right? It's always wise. Chapter 43. Then with courteous question he inquired of Gawain what dire need had driven him on that festal date, with such keenness from the king's court, to come forth alone, ere wholly the holidays from men's homes had departed. In sooth, sir, he said, you say but the truth. A high errand and a hasty from that house brought me. For I am summoned myself to seek for a place, though I wonder where in the world I must wander to find it. I would not miss coming nigh it on New Year's morning. For all the land of Logres, so our Lord help me. And so, sir, this question I inquire of you here. Can you tell me in truth if you ever heard of a green chapel, on what ground it may stand, and of the great knight that guards it, all green in his color? For the terms of a tryst were between us established, to meet that man at that mark, if I remained alive. And the named New Year is now nearly upon me, and I would look on that Lord, if God will allow me, more gladly by God's Son, that gain any treasure. So indeed, if you please, depart now I must. For my business I have now but barely 3 days, and I would fainer fall dead than fail in my errand. Then laughing said the Lord, now linger you must, for when 'tis time to that tryst I will teach you the road. On what ground is the green chapel? Let it grieve you no more. In your bed you shall be, sir, till broad is the day, without fret, and then fare on the first of the year, and come to the mark at mid-morn, there to make what play you know. Remain till New Year's Day, then rise and riding go. We'll set you on your way, 'tis but 2 miles or so. So Gawain rode through Wales and England for a couple of months, 2 or so months, asking around. Nobody had heard of a Green Knight or a Green Chapel. Then he finds this suspicious castle in the woods, and the lord of this castle seems to know quite a bit. He knows where the Green Chapel is, and conveniently, it's just 2 miles away. So why don't you stay, Gawain? Stay. And I'll just have someone show you the way later. It'll be all right. Don't worry. Trust me. Yeah, nothing strange here at all. Chapter 44. Then Gawain was delighted, because he's never suspicious of anything, ever. And in gladness he laughed. Now I thank you 1,000 times for this beyond all. Now my quest is accomplished. As you crave it, I will. Dwell a few days here, and else do what you order. The Lord then seized him and set him in a seat beside him, and let the ladies be sent for to delight them the more, for their sweet pleasure there in peace by themselves. For love of him that Lord was as loud in his mirth as one near out of his mind, who scarce knew what he meant. Then he called to the knight, crying out loudly, you have promised to do whatever deed I propose. Will you hold this behest here at this moment? So he's calling in Gawain's promise already. He's like, you said you'd do whatever I asked, didn't you? Well, I got something to ask you. Let's do it right now, all right? And Gawain's like, sure, okay. Yes, certainly, sir. Then said the true knight, while I remain in your mansion, your command I'll obey. Well, returned he, you have traveled and toiled from afar, and then I've kept you awake. You're not well yet, not cured. Both sustenance and sleep 'tis certain you need. Upstairs you shall stay, sir, and stopped there in comfort, tomorrow till mass time, and to a meal then go, And when you wish with my wife, who with you shall sit, and comfort you with her company, till to court I return. You stay, and I shall early rouse, and a hunting wend my way. Gawain gracefully bows, your wishes I will obey. So Bertilac explains the first part of his request. It's a two-part request. First part, why don't you sleep in tomorrow and chat with my wife a bit and have some food and be lazy around the castle? How's that sound? And I'm going to go hunting. I'm going to leave really early and go hunting. So never mind me. I'm going to have a blast hunting out in the woods. You just sleep in and rest because you're probably still weary from all those travels. Even though you've been here a few days, sleeping and feasting and drinking, you probably need some more of that. So you keep doing that. I'm going to go hunting. That's part one of his request. And Gawain's like, yeah, sure. Sounds good. Why not? Chapter 45. One thing more, said the master. We'll make an agreement. Whatever I win in the woods, at once shall be yours. And whatever gain you may get, you shall give in exchange. Shall we swap thus, sweet man? Come say what you think, whether one's luck be light or one's lot be better. By God, quoth Gawain, I agree to it all, and whatever play you propose seems pleasant to me. Done, 'tis a bargain. Who'll bring us the drink? So said the lord of the land. They laughed one and all, they drank and they dallied, and they did as they pleased, these lords and ladies, as long as they wished. And then, with customs of France and many courtly phrases, they stood in sweet debate and soft words bandied, and lovingly they kissed their leave-taking. With trusty attendants and torches gleaming, they were brought at the last to their beds so soft, one and all. Yet ere to bed they came, he the bargain did oft recall. He knew how to play a game, the old governor of that hall. So chapter 45 ends part 2, but it ends on a very curious note. And yeah, Lord Bertilac apparently likes to play games, weird games. His game is that he will go out hunting, you sleep in, Gawain sleeps in, and talks to his wife and eats and relaxes. Gets to be lazy all day. And whatever they win, at the end of the day, they must trade. Now, it's clear what Bertilac might win. If he hunts, he might hunt a deer or something, some meat, some fur, can trade that. But it's very unclear as to what Gawain's expected to win. Is he supposed to steal a napkin or something? Be like, here, I found your napkin. I won this. Or maybe he's going to give him part of his lunch or something. I don't know. Very unclear. But it should also be noted that the chapter, especially the stanza at the bottom, emphasizes that it's curious how this guy just loves to play games. As if the author's really trying to drive home some sort of suspicion here. But I'll leave you to think about that. Make sure to look over your study guide, answer what questions you can, and I'll see you in the video for the part 3 read and lecture. Take care, guys, and have a good night.